Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone, depending on where you're from. I'm in Denver, Colorado right now, where it is mid to late afternoon. So, pleasure to be here, and thank you for the introduction, Robin. And let's go ahead and get started. So, the goal for today is really just to give a quick briefing over what we're doing in the Regional and Remote Communities Initiative and Task Force. It's an initiative that's near and dear to me, coming from a lot of a rural background and dealing with a lot of remote environments. And as my last couple of decades, as Robin mentioned, has been in technology. We've done a lot in that space to go through and work to bring technology to areas, to industries, to economic sectors, to regions that may otherwise not have a lot of those opportunities brought to them otherwise. So it's been something that's been a very important initiative. So as Smart Cities Council has decided to also take this on as an initiative and asked me to assist in the task force and the global thought lead position. Certainly what we wanted to do today is to get everybody up to speed on where we're at, what we're doing, what our vision is, and so on. So without further delay on that, I'll take you directly into what we're looking at for the initiative and the task force and where people can participate. So generally speaking, our vision is pretty straightforward. We believe every community and municipality, regardless of size, really needs to have access to a digital economy, to digital transformation, to all of the products and services that come with that. That as we're seeing more and more emphasis on these days is designed to enrich lives, to promote safety, to promote prosperity, to promote sustainability, and so on and so forth. What we've been seeing more and more of, though, is the divide taking place, to where we want this goal to be achieved at all levels of society so that everybody can share in all of the success. The problem that we're seeing right now, though, is that investments in technology are happening more in the urbanized environments and far, far less in the remote environments. We, as part of this task force, want to find a way to bridge that and to start closing that gap as much as possible. So the investments in technology in these sectors are really going to help secure the abilities for citizens to enhance their livability, for businesses to support workability, including remote workforces, including relocation of industries, and so on. And really to give the chances for local and regional governments to participate in not only sustainability, but also in digitally engaging their public, which is one of our initial drivers within the task force, is to paint roadmaps on how to get that accomplished. So what are some of the challenges? And today, we're looking at a global population of around 8 billion people. There are an estimated 4 million known communities around the world. Now, that's all shapes and sizes. You're talking about cities, of which a city is defined differently depending on who you talk to, but generally a city can be anywhere with a population over 10, 25, or 50,000 and up. And that, again, has broad implications on what you consider that to be a city versus a town versus a village versus a county versus a parish versus, fill in the blank here. So again, as I was saying, we're talking about 4 million known communities out there. What's happened here that's gotten very interesting over the last few years is that urban populations are about half of the people, a little more than half actually, out of 8 billion people. 4.5 billion of those people now live in urban areas, whereas rural areas account for 3.4 billion. So there's a propensity for that growth on the urban side. The third bullet here is really the most interesting of that, because 2007 was the inflection point. Prior to 2007, there were more in the rural areas than there were in the urban areas. What's happened in the last 17 to 20 years? Well, what's happened in large part has been a growth in technology. And that growth in technology has oftentimes attracted people away. Now, this is by far not the only cause for urbanization, but that among other things has created more opportunities in those urban areas. And what you're seeing right now, if you look at the graphs that provide population location, it's a pretty linear line going up for urban area movement and a pretty linear line going down for rural decline in population, and they crossed in 2007. So that inflection point is something to take note of. And smaller communities really face significant challenges that we want to take a very strong swipe at addressing here within this task force. We want to look at digital access. Do you even have access into the internet? Right now in the United States and around the world, we have Elon Musk dropping satellites to the tune of 40 or 50 at a time in space, trying to get Starlink to get an addressable internet to an accessible internet to the world. We've got HughesNet, we've got so on, and all those different types of satellite providers out there. Not necessarily the greatest alternatives, but what you're also seeing in the developed markets is a big push to get fiber in the ground and growth in cellular technology that's happening to try and get to these areas. But there's so much land and territory to work with here. The digital access is still a big problem in a lot of these remote and regional areas. Another significant challenge is loss of population, especially in the younger generation. And with that then goes the digital literacy and everything that comes with that. Who are the most literate in digital technologies these days? It's typically not our grandparents. It's typically the younger generations. And guess what? They're leaving and they're heading to urban areas. That's a problem. So we've got some very big challenges as a task force to come up with resources and capabilities for those regional and remote communities to be able to attract some of that, or at least stabilize it and have a pathway to have opportunities come back into those sectors. And also digitally enabled government. We find less and less government capabilities in the digital environments or digital arena as we get further away. I'll talk a little bit more about this here in a couple more slides. But so what are some of the advantages that smaller communities bring to the table? In other words, what are some of the things that are going to help us in our work to assist these communities? Well, what are some of the foundations that we can build in? Number one, less density. We don't have a lot of people to work with. That actually makes for a pretty attractive environment for people to move to, because that also falls hand in hand with safer communities. Where are the crime rates the highest around the world? They're in densely populated areas. We have cleaner environments. We have lower cost of living, which is a massive draw, especially for industry. And generally speaking, everybody that lives out in the country, they tend to be a little less stressed and they're a little bit more focused on community. Everybody knows everybody. Those are all building blocks that we can work with, that we can use to our advantage to help really spur some good, positive outcomes and changes within those environments. So moving on to the next slide, let's real quick talk about some of the headwinds. And we've talked a little bit about this in the last few minutes, but smaller communities definitely do face some headwinds. What are some possible obstacles that we need to be thinking about? Well, we talked about data literacy. There is less technology access. There's less technology literacy and digital literacy out in the remote environments. There's also less government sophistication. We talked a little bit about that earlier, but what's important to keep in mind here is that the skill sets for information technology in general, the budgets to be able to afford some of these things just aren't there in the proportions and in the amounts that are available in the larger urban areas. Those are things that we need to work with. So are career opportunities. As a result of creating a digitally integrated public ecosystem in these communities, something needs to be there to keep people there. And career opportunities are definitely right up that alley. I just got back from vacation out in a very remote area in the Midwest in the United States. It's interesting to me to drive through some very small communities in that area. And those small communities have populations of 150 or 1,702, small communities, but there's a factory sitting in the middle of some of those. And that factory employs 400 people. Why are they there? Why are they there making cookies to distribute around the country and around the world? Why are they there making whatever they make? They've been attracted there. They've been attracted there by a lower cost of living. They've been attracted there by a workforce that is looking for some economic development opportunities and some career development opportunities. They're looking for a better tax base to work with and incentives associated with that. So this is happening all over the place. And the last administration here in the U.S., we had a big return of factories about halfway through that administration into the U.S., and they all went out to some of these less served areas because it was very advantageous financially for them to do that. So, but we also find that there's reduced educational and healthcare capacity out in those remote areas. You know, here in Colorado, where I'm located, we have a great deal of remote and regional territory that's sparsely populated, and doctors are only in certain communities, certain days of the week. And that's it. There is no hospital. There's a doctor that rotates through every so often, and potentially a physician assistant, but that's it. That's what they got. That's not a draw for people to move there. So we need to certainly be thinking about a lot of that. And of course, some of the headwinds they also face that isn't necessarily on the budget or on the slide here, rather, is looking at the aging population. The healthcare needs there are considerable, and that aging population is primarily what's left out in those communities. So the last bullet here talking about urbanization, certainly urbanization is a problem that's facing these communities because people are leaving. And, you know, how do we go through and start to correct some of that? So moving on to some of the things that we're looking at here in terms of helping those small communities evolve. We built a playbook recently of a few slides, and this is one of those slides from that playbook for what we want to do and be able to accomplish in this initiative. There are 4 stages that we've really identified as community evolution, and that falls into preparation, organic evolution, a partner integration, and an expansion of visibility. So what do we mean by those things? Well, in preparation, what we're really talking about here is figuring out what goals a jurisdiction wants to achieve. I can promise you that if it's an agricultural community, they have a certain set of goals. But if it's a ski town, like we have up in the mountains here in Colorado, it's a completely different set of priorities. They have a completely different set of economic drivers. So we need to be able to cater to what those different communities' individual needs are, and they will not be a one-size-fits-all by any means. So we'll certainly want to be able to take those into consideration as a task force. The goals really need to be aligned with those community needs, and with a defined set of goals, we can start to create a strategy and a plan or a roadmap that people can execute against. Organic evolution is the next phase of this, and when you're creating a digitally integrated public ecosystem and digitally enabling a region, one of the first things that needs to happen is the government needs to get smart in technology. And that means creating that digital foundation. If there's one thing that's happening that is almost at an uncontrollable pace around the world is data creation. We're creating massive, massive amounts of information. At the same time, the urban areas are beginning to, in their government sectors, beginning to digitalize the availability of all their services. If you want to rent a pavilion in a park, you go online to do it. If you want to request a permit for building a barn, you go online to do it. If you want to go through and look for assistance for housing or for jobs or whatever, you go online to do that. That's not the case as soon as you get outside of the large urban areas. So as part of the organic evolution, we want to be able to align the government in terms of all of their products and services, all of their departments, and start to build that digital foundation and then make that accessible to the local public so that they have one place online they can go and be able to access or request any services, products, etc., assistance, whatever the case may be, from that regional government. That's one of the first steps in that evolution is digitally engaging your citizens and your businesses. The next phase in this is really around partner integration. And an integrated jurisdiction is in a really good place now to start communicating digitally with other jurisdictions and other partners. Those might be special districts, another town. That actually could expand into healthcare, into other civic services, and actually open the door for a lot more opportunities in education and also employment. What's very often the case in a lot of society today is that The governments tend to operate in silos. They tend to think that this is their world, this is their boundaries, nobody comes in, nobody goes out. But within government, you have not just the local government. Education is often run by the government. Healthcare in a lot of these sectors is often managed, run, or regulated by the government. So this is a perfect place for us to go through and bring those partners in and make those part of the accessibility options to the public in that ecosystem. So not at all difficult to do, but it's certainly a pathway to help expand the possibilities. One of the things I'll talk about in a few minutes is this idea of a digital cluster, where you take a county or a parish or whatever the regional titling is for that particular set of property, that square mileage. And within that, you're going to find, a county that has maybe 2 or 3 towns, maybe a couple of small settlements, maybe one city, maybe 5 or 10 special districts. They can all exist as a single cluster that could be accessible by the general public, both citizens and businesses and visitors. So that's part of the partner integration piece. And the last piece of that is really around visibility expansion. So as smaller towns and rural communities really continue to evolve and become that so-called smart epicenter, that visibility and appeal is going to grow. And that becomes attractive. So a community that advances digitally tends to attract. And we're looking at some of those initiatives here in the United States, where if we go through and evolve a community, we want to try and carry as much of the surrounding communities with that evolution as possible, because otherwise those communities get left behind very, very quickly, and it is not fun trying to catch up. So because with that comes opportunities, with that comes availability and access to healthcare, to job assistance, to food assistance, to housing assistance, to access to digital services. That's where people want to go. So with that visibility expansion, we really want to make sure that we try and bring as much appeal to a broader area as much as possible. Well, the task force is going to be creating resources to make that possible and to make that more defined on a per community basis. Now, one of the things to also keep in mind with that when we talk about visibility expansion, and I'll talk about this in a moment as well, but is the idea to monetize information. So not that we want to sell information to the public, but we do want to sell it when possible to other potential businesses that may be looking for that information but had no way to get it in the past. Give you an example. We have traffic data that are being collected by a lot of cities and towns in the United States. That data is being subscribed to, or has potential to be subscribed to and purchased based off of IoT links. They can actually purchase data from those sensors to use for their own commercial uses. That may be to sell more cameras. That may be to take that data and statistically drive information that's going to help drive grants. There can be a great variety of needs and use cases for that. But the point is, when you expand that visibility, you have that information available. What we've always found is that a lot of people want it, besides just the people you're serving in your constituency. So that gives you an idea of some of those evolution components. Here's a sample roadmap of what that might look like. When we go through and build a roadmap for a small community, maybe that community has a goal that says, I want to create that digitally integrated public ecosystem. It's kind of a generic start, but it's a good start. Their goals are going to be relatively generic in this example, but they can certainly be more specific depending on the economic drivers and social drivers in their community. But the identified goals in this particular example are, hey, we want to integrate all of our departments. We want our information and our product and services to all be tied together. I can't tell you how many towns and governments we work with that have information that does not agree with themselves. So one department is feeding information to leadership. Another department is feeding information that has similar variables to the same leadership, but the information is different. They don't agree. That has happened in every single city and town I have talked to, every one of them, without a doubt. And also, these guys want to have a goal to engage the public with a simplified pathway to interact with the government. So how do we make sure that experience is meaningful, is beneficial, and is sustainable over the long term? So what are the phases that we would recommend? Well, first of all, phase one, let's integrate those departments. Let's maintain system independence. It's very important to say, if you're going to be integrated as an agency, doesn't mean we're going to rip away all the things that you've been using. It means we're going to use the information from those and get to commonality, but you're still going to use the exact same ticketing system. You're going to use the exact same metering system. None of that changes, but we want to integrate the data. We want to create master data that can be relied upon within that phase. We want to provide correct and consistent information. We want to use more advanced features that are digitally possible today, like APIs, to existing and to future systems. So as this community evolves, they may find that their system for submitting a service request is no longer keeping up with where their society is going. So they want to replace it. The beauty of this type of a roadmap is that they can rip and replace any systems they want. They all link to the same center data foundation. Therefore, the turn-up period and the data availability and the data consistency does not change, and the turn-up period is vastly shortened. So, and a lot of these communities, depending on their size, are actually looking at digital twinning, and they want to be able to collect data to be able to start feeding into those twins so that they can have decent future-looking thoughts on where they need to build, where they need to focus their roads, where they need to focus resources on X, Y, or Z use case. So the next phase would be to integrate the public. Let's give them all that digital access. The next phase is let's integrate those partners. That digital cluster model where we have multi-tenants all sitting on one instance, because one of the problems with technology in the urban areas that makes it difficult in the rural areas is cost, is pricing. Now, if we come at this from a digital cluster concept, then multiple communities can exist separately, but on one tenant, which takes their overall cost down to the same or less than one city is paying, which is vastly more appealing to those environments, because now they can access grant funding. Now they can potentially sustain this all by themselves. There's all kinds of advantages to doing something like that, to going into that cluster model. But what are the practical advantages of that? Well, that model, when you start bringing in multiple communities, now we can eliminate duplication of services. Now we can go through and provide more efficient services and assistance and more thorough assistance to the general public. Again, housing, food, employment, and so on. Those are all some of the big hitters in those areas. That's a good portion of most communities' interactions with their constituency right now is through those assistance programs, especially in the rural areas where there's typically a lower income level and oftentimes more needs for certain types of assistance per capita. So then as a fourth phase, we go through and create channels for education, employment, and so on, to where they can get to the public and the public can get to them. And then finally, we create channels to monetize that information. So these are all resources and plans that we are going to continue to build and have available for our subscribing communities. So what are some of the goals that we're trying to get to? What are some of the things that we want to be able to deliver? First of all, one of the first things that we're taking on right now is developing an assessment. And an assessment goes through and stratifies communities based on those profiles, those economic and demographic drivers, and allows us to focus on specific drivers, so that if we've got an assessment, it can't be the same set of questions that we're going to ask in agriculture as we are for tourism, as we are for whatever the driver is for that particular community, whether it be a manufacturing plant that drives the entire town or whatever the case may be. Within that assessment, the output from that is going to be analyzed whenever taken by a community. It will be analyzed by us at the Smart Cities Council to identify opportunities and build a suggested roadmap. And that consulting can continue on through. So one of the next things that we're going to be making sure we have available is these resources that are available to these communities beyond the assessment. That includes things like funding and grant vehicles. The turn-up of this type of technology enablement is always the most expensive part. The ongoing costs are fairly nominal once you get going, but the turn-up costs can be extreme at times, depending on what their budget is in relation to that. So how do we offset that? That's where we need to bring in grant and funding vehicles to help that. There's also consulting capabilities that would build on that assessment's initial output to create the goals and help with planning, to help with economic development and pathways for that, for attracting industries, helping them determine what are going to be drivers that are going to be most efficient to attract those industries. And also population diversity and expanded opportunities. Those are different things that we can help consult with. And also, I think one of the more notable pieces that a lot of people on this particular briefing may be interested in primarily is becoming part of an international vendor catalog of resources, so that we can go through and say we know who some of the industry leading contributors are in these particular areas, whether that be digital technology foundation, whether that be digital twinning, whether that be fill in the blank on what those capabilities are. We want to vet and secure those participants into that catalog so that communities can now have a trusted resource they can go to and say, these people are going to be the right ones to go talk to for our needs. And also, I think one of the other things that becomes very important here is that we want to connect communities to other communities. There's a lot of opportunity for collaboration here. There's a lot of opportunity for additional work groups and initiatives to be formed and to move forward. And there's an awful lot of opportunity for communities to learn from each other and build on use cases and understand some things work well, some things don't work well. If we don't share the information, nobody knows. So let's make sure we can get that done as well. So as we start to wind this down, because I'm not going to bomb you with too many slides here today, participation in the task force, we are seeking both public and private partners to participate in this, to be able to quickly connect industry experts and best practices with community insights around what their goals, needs, and priorities are. So to put a room full of vendors together doesn't do anybody any good, and to put a room full of communities together often has the exact same result. We need to put both together and be able to come at this from a position of here are some of our problems and here are some of our solutions. So if we can get those into the same room, because they won't necessarily line up evenly until we understand what each other has to offer and what some of our needs are. So we're looking for a wide background of experience. On the government side, people that have housing, food, employment, and education assistance experience, those are some of the bigger drivers out there right now. Those are some of the drivers that, what do they need to be able to get to their population the fastest, the easiest, and the most efficiently, to be able to get these services at least known out there to their wider constituency. People that have backgrounds in community sustainability. Those are also very large drivers and becoming larger drivers. So sustainability can be anything from safe communities to efficient use of resources, and resources can be water, can be electricity, can be any number of things. Expanding employment, educational opportunities, people that have backgrounds and experience in that, because education is a key for society to move forward. And we want to make sure that we find ways to get that in and accessible. Healthcare, also a very big priority. People that have experience in healthcare, especially in remote environments. And then very, very important to look for IT sector expertise, because there will be a lot of need to not necessarily custom design, but to do a lot of custom tailoring to what each assessment reveals about a particular community. So that IT expertise is going to be very crucial in doing that, and certainly other backgrounds, we welcome that. I apologize. I've got painters in my house, and my dog does not like them. So anyway, but fortunately, we're winding towards the latter part of this. So at the end, what I'd say is, feel free to join us. And if you're interested in learning more about what we're going to be doing and creating and building, please reach out to us, and reach out to either Robin or myself to participate in the task force. We're going to start aligning meetings and work groups and deliverables within the next quarter. So certainly looking forward to having more participation. And with that, I will wrap it up and take any questions or comments that anyone may have.
Thanks, John. I think, the important piece is going to be getting feedback from participants on, what's missing, which cities we could use as use cases, if there are existing projects that we can review.